Hi, thanks for joining us for another podcast. I'm Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Tobias Demker. These are spontaneous conversations that we have around topics to do with personal development, professional development, and organizational change. And our purpose here is really just to encourage people and inspire people on their own individual or professional journeys, better leadership, and more positive organizations. And very spontaneous, unscripted, and we're really just hoping you'll enjoy the exchange and get something out of them, and it'll inspire you to bring some of those things into your life. So with that, we have a topic that we try and cover each week, and so Toby, why don't you kick us off? What topic are we going to start with today?
All right. Well, thank you. So I thought about talking about stress today. Stress is something good or bad. It's part of our lives, whether we like it or not, and it's important to us from, I think, from an individual perspective, from a leadership perspective. It's important from an organizational perspective, from a team perspective. So, in our field of work, it always comes in either if it's in coaching or just for personal practice, or of course as a leader, how do you deal with stress in the workplace, etc. So I just thought we could have a conversation about stress, how to deal with it, how do you see it, what are some good or bad things about it. So maybe that's a good starting point. So, stress, is it good or bad? What do you reckon?
Well, certainly there are good and bad elements to stress. I think stress is something that, just all you have to do. Well, first of all, I think recognizing that there's physical and emotional stress, psychological stress, or different angles to look at it from. Obviously, when you go to the gym and you're trying to work out, or any kind of sport where you're trying to build muscle, or that stresses you, but it's still good for you. Um,
Hmm.
Building your immune system, stressing it will help make it stronger. The same goes for challenging yourself, mentally, emotionally. Those can cause stress, but they, make you a stronger person. So I think certainly there are positive sides to stress, but it's interesting on the topic today because obviously we're living in stressful times. The COVID situation has made people stressed because there's other than the existential issues that people have around whether it's health or their income, it just being locked up at home is stressful. And I read actually recently, just 2 days ago, there was a really interesting piece that talked about how the lack of physical and just one-on-one or personal contact with people has significantly reduced the amount of, or does significantly reduce the amount of serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine that your brain produces. So,
Hmm.
oxytocin being that kind of bonding neurotransmitter, or I can't remember if it's a hormone or neurotransmitter, but certainly
Hmm.
they have a similar effect. And conversely, then your brain, it produces more cortisol, the stress hormone. So
Yeah.
so not only is there the stress of the various situations that we're in, but also the way your body chemistry is reacting to the situation causes you to
Uh-huh.
feel more stress. So
Yeah.
yeah, we're living in times where there's definitely heightened stress, and I notice it when I'm trying, we did our talk about empathy, and I'm trying to be
Yeah.
empathetic that when people have a short fuse and become keyboard warriors, or they lose their temper, I'm trying to be empathetic that a lot of people right now are going through, yeah, difficult emotional times. What about you? How do you
Yeah.
see it with the people you talk to?
Well, you really got me thinking about, well, two things there that that I want to touch on. So the first thing that is that, yeah, I can definitely see the positive sides of stress. I remember very clearly, many years ago when I was studying for my driver's license, that we were taught that stress can be really good, but it can be really bad. So it's, if it's um, if from a positive point of view, it can make you perform better, it makes you more aware, etc. But if it goes, off the charts, it's going to have a negative effect on your, your judgment, your physical state, etc., etc. So obviously, it can be good or bad. But for me, I want to start out by highlighting the positive sides of stress. I mean, for me, I'm definitely one of those persons that if I have a little bit of stress, especially external stress, it will make me perform so much better. If I don't have any stress, I can just, it really has the lack of any kind of stress would have a negative effect on my performance, I think. So I just want to highlight that first. The second thing that you brought up was then we're living in stressful times. And I wonder about that. What is making times now more stressful than before? I mean, when I say before, say when we were nomads and we had the risk of being attacked by a tiger or a lion or attacked by a snake or something to a much larger extent, or the face of the risk of war was at your doorstep. What is making our time now so much more stressful than we might think before? I'm not sure about that, actually.
Well, I think that's where you go to the whole idea of where is stress? Like, where does stress lie? Obviously, as I just mentioned, our neurochemistry does dictate some of that. But at the end of the day, the stress is in your mind, right? Unless it's physical stress, certainly stress is something that the emotional and mental stress that we feel is something that resides, within our mind. And is that me dinging? Is that me? Is that my phone?
You're dinging. Yeah.
So apologize for that. So for sure, a lot of it is mental, and I think if you go way back to our ancestors who hunter-gatherer societies, I'm not an anthropologist, but I imagine we've developed, our brain has developed since then. If you go into nature, I had a really interesting experience when a couple of years ago, I spent some time out in a bush camp in Africa, and it was great. And the guide had pointed out that we saw, I can't remember if it was antelope or gazelles, but anyway, they were herd of these let's say they were gazelles, and he said that what would happen is if there were a lion that some lions that were trying to attack the herd, whether or not there was a kill or not, after the hunt was over, the rest of the herd, if they got away safely, or even if one was killed or whatever, they would go back to grazing within 5 minutes. They came right back down. So their fear response and their stress levels were back down to normal. So I think that what we've done as we've evolved, whether our brains have evolved and developed further, I'm sure they have, or also the amount that we are in our thinking minds causes us a lot of stress. How much time do you spend in the moment present, and how much time do you spend sort of, not you personally, but how much time does one spend, the average person, sort of ruminating on the past or worried about the future, right? And that is a huge stress factor. So I think from a personal perspective, it's not too stressful for me because, I'm financially not majorly impacted by the COVID situation, and I'm restricted on travel, but all things said and done, I've got good health, roof over my head. I'm not worried about my income. Whereas, there are places in the world, I look to the US and I think, wow, there are a lot of people really stressed. And even in the first couple of months of this pandemic, there was a stat that came out that 1 in 4 people had been considering suicide. Like, imagine the amount of stress and mental duress that you must be under in order to, to come to that kind of a conclusion. So I'd say, yeah, for you and I, you live in Sweden. I mean, come on, everything's taken care of for you there, right?
A lot of people would disagree, but okay.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm generalizing, but I think we are very fortunate. So, yeah, I think certainly there is stress depending on your situation, but for sure the stress, a lot of it is in your mind. That's why I always try and remind myself that, everything always works out for me. Even if at this moment, when I look at my life, when I reflect and I think of the times that I was stressed and I was frustrated with the way things are going, everything ended up working out. That whole journey brought me to where I am, and I'm grateful for it. So I encourage people to try and see it from that way. But I have the privilege and the benefit of living in very comfortable circumstances and having had a lot of great opportunities. So I think it depends on your life situation in a lot of ways. What do you think?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah. First of all, okay, I don't want to de-emphasize the problems around stress. I mean, when I'm saying that, or when I'm challenging, do we live in stressful times rather than before? I mean, let's continue that discussion. But I don't want to de-emphasize that stress has an extremely negative effect on a lot of people around us, and a lot of people are suffering from it, obviously.
Yeah.
So where I want to go is that obviously before, when I'm saying before, from a historical point of view, the modern society, we have longer life expectancy, we have material stuff around us. In most ways, life is better. It should be less kind of external stressors on us from that point of view. But it seems, I don't have the data on this, but it seems that people are suffering more from stress now than before.
I agree.
And I mean, we're living in a society where we're comparing all each other. I mean, we're surrounded by likes on our social media platform, and that's kind of driving our behaviors in many ways. We got peer pressure from peers around us in the workplace, and just from society in general. So these stressors, where are they coming from? Where all these demands and requirements, are they coming from? Are they external stressors, or do we put them? Are they real? I mean, is it just false assumptions? Something that we talked about before. So I think to talk about stress and to be able to deal with stress, it's so important to identify where the stress is coming from. Is it real? Is it not real? Is it external? Is it my own demands that I'm putting on myself? What is making myself putting these demands or these requirements on myself, etc. So I mean, I think that's, if we haven't started talking about the stress management, but I mean, that would be the kind of the starting point for that.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from now. I do agree that a lot of the stress is internal. We have less external stresses than I agree with you. We were living in better times, even though I guess the external stressors are things like the news. So if you're feeling stressed, reduce the amount of news in your life. I actually, to be honest with you, where I really noticed the difference was before I moved to Europe. When I left Canada, moved to Europe, there was 6 months when I was traveling through Asia, and I didn't have a lot of access to the news. I just didn't watch a lot of TV, read books, talk to people, traveling through places like Thailand and Laos and stuff. And, there were pre-recorded movies to watch, but I didn't have CNN in the background. Like, I don't know if you can remember back to when there were no 24-hour news channels. You tuned in at the 6 o'clock news, and you didn't have this constant news cycle, and you certainly didn't have all the digital sources of news, and today also misinformation. So everybody's living off this exaggerated kind of flow of information, but they're hyper focused on certain issues, and then things get blown out. Things seem a lot worse than they are. And actually, you mentioned him last time. Who's the? I always forget his name. The Swedish guy who sadly died a few years ago.
Hans Rosling. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I read his book Factfulness, and also he did a great TED Talk. And he really points to the negativity bias that we have. And I think that negativity bias does generate a lot of internal stress. So I think you're right there. We have far more internal self-produced stress than certainly our ancestors did, and even just a few generations ago, right? People were more concerned about the day-to-day, where are they going to eat? Are they going to have a place to sleep? And now, there's workplace stress. Will I lose my job? Certainly, we in our societies don't have a threat of starving to death. We have a safety net. In Germany and Sweden, we have a safety net. So you're right to go back and look at what's the reality. How bad could it get? What's the worst case scenario? And a lot of times it's a loss of face. Your ego's hurt or whatever. Those are the real threats if we break it down. So I think you're right there.
Yeah, I mean, also then if we're looking into the future, one thing that is probably going to accelerate the level of stress is I was just looking at some reports for the future workplace, etc. And it seems like what's going to be needed from us as workers or employees in the future is this constant need to develop and continue to learn. I mean, before you could have a job and you could be, you were an accountant and you're an accountant for the rest of your life. But these kind of jobs, they're not going to exist anymore. It's going to be this constant need to develop yourself and to learn new skills all the time to be able to keep a job, right? Mm-hmm. And how do you deal with that kind of pressure for if you're already stressed now? It's kind of, I don't have the answer here, but I think it's a really interesting question to think about. If we're feeling stressed now, it's not going to get slower. It's not the speed, the change is not going to decrease. It's just going to go faster and faster and faster. So how are we going to be able to deal with this as a species, but more as an individual?
Yeah, I think it's something that needs to be addressed on a governmental and cultural level. How do we create an environment, not only for us, but for the next generation, where the stress levels are lower? Because you'll find that when there are a lot more, stress does have a big role to play in our health, not only our mental health but our physical health. It's a symbiotic relationship. Obviously, you have you know that your mental state does affect your physical health. That's been confirmed by science. So I think in order to build a strong society, we will have to look at that. But going back to individuals and finding ways to improve your own mental health, there's lots of things. I talk a lot about meditation and so on, and those are becoming more prevalent. Even in workplace, people encourage, at least the more progressive kind of workplaces encourage things like taking time out, making sure you take enough vacation, daily meditation, doing enough exercise. Those are all things that reduce stress, and that's something that I'm experiencing. I still play basketball, and with COVID, the gyms are all closed, and so I can't play. Not only do I love the sport, but I also don't have that physical outlet to reduce my stress levels. So I think we've become more sedentary, right? So there's not that physical exertion that helps us relieve some of our mental stress. And certainly we're not taught in school. We're not taught by our parents because they didn't learn it. A lot of the ways that you can manage your own stress levels by manage your thinking processes and not letting your thoughts spiral out of control, so that you're laying awake at night and having to look. What's the common response when someone's feeling anxiety or someone's feeling depression? There's a prescription, right? A lot of people will turn to some kind of pharmaceutical, and for some people in acute cases that can, save their life, that can really benefit them. But as a sort of, solution for everyday problems, it's really treating the symptoms rather than dealing with the issue themselves. So I think it's about incorporating some healthy practices in your life, from meditation or mindfulness to physical exercise. But I mean, or even doing creative things. So what do you do for yourself?
Yeah.
You're a relaxed guy.
I guess I am pretty relaxed. But I just want to highlight that I think these kind of conversations are just so incredibly important. I know people say that, we need to talk about stress and etc. But I mean, okay, first of all, organizations, they're putting processes into place to deal with stress. Okay, if it's taking time off, working, flexible working times, etc., etc. A lot of these things are happening. Leaders are becoming more aware about it. But still, I mean, again, I don't have the data for this, but I'm assuming that the amount of burnouts, the negative side effects of stress is having an impact on individuals and on organizations. And it's, I have friends that are feeling stressed or close to burnout. I have a lot of friends that have had burnouts as well. The challenging thing is not to understand that, okay, maybe I need to do a mindfulness exercise or something. The problem is that they're still expected, or they're still expected by themselves, but also by their surroundings to just pull themselves together and to perform. And we don't have the awareness in our societies and our workplaces around how to deal with people that are suffering from the consequences of stress. I think that's the real issue. And it just needs a lot more awareness around it, a lot more conversations around it, so people feel safer to admit or to recognize that they are suffering from some of these consequences, and then finding different strategies to deal with it. That's more on an individual level. Maybe I'm talking more from a macro level here, but I think it's easy to say, but we just need to continue to have these kind of conversations and realize that this is a normal state that people are suffering from.
Yeah. And I obviously it happens at various levels. I think if you want to have a healthy organization, you need to make sure that, some of the reason that people want to do this meditation is because they want to improve their performance. But that's not necessarily the solution either. As you pointed to, maybe it's reducing some of the expectations and not putting yourself under as much pressure. It's probably a combination of both. I think ambition, it can be a really good thing. It can also be detrimental, taken to extremes. I think if you're relying on your organization to do it for you, I always like to look at empowering individuals and encouraging them, one, to be more self-aware and to be proactive in their own well-being, right? Whether it's, and to be able to, draw a line in the sand, create limits. But not there are some organizations where that's tough to do because you'll lose your job or you won't get the promotion and so on. So it's about so many things. So from expectations that you put on yourself or the organization's expectations of you. So as an organization, you can, when you're setting objectives, we always talk about SMART objectives, but making sure things that are achievable, time bound, making sure that you're not putting undue stress on your organization, even though you're trying to move forward as quickly as possible. Finding that balance, and I think if you're, especially for women in business, in organizations as well, they have a lot of times there are still, in some countries, there are still very kind of traditional gender roles. And so that you find women trying to be successful, they want to have the career and the kids, and the pressure is on them to manage both of those. That's come a long way in some countries and in some cultures, but I find you see a lot more increase in stress on women. Although if you look at the statistics, on the suicide rate, you'll find in most countries men with the exception of China, country
Yeah.
you're very well aware
That's good.
of, women's suicide rate is slightly more in China than over men, but far and away in every country, men in some cases more than double the suicide rate. And that's for me one indicator of not being able to handle the pressure, the stress, feeling unhappy, feeling that incongruence between your values and what you're being asked to do, and also this expectation that society is putting on you, who you're supposed to be, what it means to be, a man or a woman or whatever, if you believe in those gender types. So I guess again, it's just such a complex issue. Sorry, I just sort of, me going off in tangents, but I was going back to I didn't want to omit when you were first talking about the positive sides of stress. Because in order to see the positive sides of stress, it's important to understand what stress does to you, right? So, you've got your parasympathetic system that does, your rest and digest, but then you've got your sympathetic nervous system, which, when you are stressed, will do things like, it'll give you kind of tunnel vision, right? And it will focus on just the essentials. You might have more adrenaline and so on. So you can see where in certain situations, if you go back, to our ancestors, if you're a hunter or gatherer, obviously when there's danger, it makes sense that you'd be ultra focused, almost paranoid, that something. And so you're hyper focused on what could go wrong or what kind of dangers are there, and you're very focused on the task at hand. You can imagine modern day situations where that's a real benefit, right? So like you say, you've got some stress, you're cramming for an exam, so you're hyper focused on what you're working on, and that helps push you through. Whereas and Simon Sinek talks about this a lot, about how the modern workplace, there's this constant stress on us, just in the background, pressure to succeed, pressure to constantly improve. I encourage personal development, but for a lot of people, this constant pressure to grow and improve and achieve really has this constant drip of cortisol. The stress hormone is constantly in our system, and that's not what it's meant to do. It's meant to be,
Exactly,
giving those momentary bursts. So sorry to take to take off our kind of topic that we were on, but I think it was important for me to circle back to, it is important to recognize the positive sides of stress. Just like stressing your body or your immune system can build it up to be stronger. And stressing your mind can make you more focused, more resilient. And there are, in some ways, when you talk about recognizing the challenges of your workplace, if you get people and this is why I do a lot of focus on the individual, because if you empower the individual, if you get a bunch of people who are feeling victimized by their work situation, I'm under too much pressure, my boss isn't fair, the organization, like that will only spiral into a negative feedback loop, and it'll make people feel helpless, and then they really won't be looking for solutions, they'll just complain about problems. So I think organizations can do a lot, but individuals really, those things aren't in your control. You can you can move organizations, but you can't. And you can encourage, or you can give feedback, and you can be a great example for others, right? But at the end of the day, you can't, unless you're at the excuse me. Thank you. But so unless you're at the top of the leadership chain hierarchy, then you can certainly work to change. But even that, you need support on. So, yeah.
No, it's a difficult balance, and it's a balance in terms of workplace to put a suitable amount of performance pressure on individuals. Because I just yesterday I read a report of how performance pressure can be a moderator for inclusive leadership when it comes to team innovation, etc. So I mean, that performance pressure can be good, but also this balance. I mean, when you're talking about the two nerve systems, we need to have a balance there as well, right? Because it's, I mean, and that's also something to notice, that when we talk about, you know, life coaching or life development, I mean, a lot of people have this expectancy that we should always be happy, and we should, you know, that as individuals we have the right to always feel good and feel happy, and that's just not true, right? I mean, we will have periods in life where we're not feeling well, we will be sick, you know, we will, and that's part of our life, that's part of our physiology and our mental state. So I mean, first of all, what are the expectations that we're putting on ourselves? But also this notion of, yes, stress can be bad if it's too much, right? Stress can be fantastic. It can be performance enhancing. It can be providing endorphins or making us happier or whatever to a certain extent. Yeah. The problem is if we're overloading over a longer period of time, right? Then it can create a lot of pressure both on our physical health and our mental health, right? So individually creating an awareness about, you know, where is the stress coming from? And I mean, because we talked about values before, so that was last time, right? When we talked about values. So just tapping into that self-awareness as well. You know, what do you value in life? What's really important for you? I've seen, and I've probably seen myself, but especially in a lot of people around me, that people are becoming increasingly stressed because they're doing things that are not aligned with their values. And it creates a lot of pressure. So there's an expectancy from others for me to be behaving in a certain way that I don't actually value myself. That can be an enormous you know, source of negative stress. So I agree that it starts with the self-awareness, that we need to think about, you know, what's important for me. At the same time, as we talked about before, we need to also provide frameworks in organizations, but more in society, of how we can just have open conversations and recognize that this is something that we need to deal with.
Yeah, I think whether it's happy or successful life, happiness is a balance too, right? You're right. This expectation that you should always be happy, and when you look at social media, all you ever see is how great people's lives are, and you know, how happy, how good their vacations. Well, okay, maybe not recently on vacations, but you know, you get all the you know, how great are my kids, how awesome is my life. Those are the things that people on Instagram and Facebook and whatever tend to put out there, right? You only want to, and that does create a lot of this. If you want to try and keep up with that status quo, yeah, that causes you a lot of stress. I think the key is setting priorities, right? In anything in life is knowing what's most important to you. Like you said, the values, but setting priorities for yourself. Because when people, what's one thing that causes a lot of stress? Not enough time, right? How many times do you hear that from people? I just don't have enough time. Well, this is one of the things I love talking to people about in coaching, is like, I'll ask them, well, how many hours are in your day? And they'll go, well, 24 hours, right? And does anyone else have more or less? Can you buy more hours? And no, you can't. And so everybody has the time is that finite kind of commodity that you can't buy, or you can't save, you can't store it up. It's just there. So to say I don't have enough of it is kind of a, it gets you off track in terms of where you should be focusing your efforts, because it's about what you do with the time you have. And a lot of times, our sense that there's not enough time really is what causes people a lot of stress. And so that's when it comes down to, well, just prioritize what's most important to you. And so I get people in the habit of saying, instead of saying that there's not enough time, it's like, well, I haven't made that a priority, right? And then you start to realize, oh, I have a choice there. I have a choice to exercise or, sit in front of the TV, which is more stress relieving,
Yeah.
I
Yeah, you
have,
always get this. I have to do something. As well, who's telling that you have to? Well, will
oh,
you,
yeah.
or do you choose to do something? And why do you choose that in front of something else? Right?
So
That's
glad you brought that up because I tell people all the time, there's only three ways to talk about the things you're going to do, or I say you can ask yourself the questions, can I, do I want to, and will I, right? So I can, I want to, and I will, right? So those are the three ways you can talk about things, not about I have to, I should. Leave those
yeah.
shoulds out of it, Wayne Dyer
I
used to,
could, yeah.
yeah, I can, I can, or I intend to, or I will, right? You can make that commitment, or you can express the desire to, or, the first question is always, do I have the ability? Can I, right? And then it's, well, do I really want to? You might be able to do it, but do you really want to? And if you have the desire, then it's, when do you make the commitment? I will, right? So sorry, I didn't want to jump into what you were going to say there, but I think that's a really important thing. And I catch myself too. In Germany, the German language, it's so common to say, I have to, I have to. It's so ingrained in there, in the culture here. And I find myself jumping into that. And then it's so funny because I'll have friends who I've told this to, and they'll remind me, you don't have to, there's no have to.
Oh,
So
nice. Oh, but that's so great that you have that mirroring back, actually.
yeah.
I think I'm the same. I tell myself and others, well, do you really have to? Who's saying that you have to? But then the day after, I'll realize that I'm saying the exactly same thing, especially to my kids. Like, can we play a bit? Well, I have to do this. But then it's difficult to say, well, I choose to work instead of play with you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sometimes you have to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you can say, well, this is really important for me right now, right? And then we'll find time to do, that with obviously with kids, it's important to set a good example and to communicate it in
No,
a
but
way that they can understand.
I think that's exactly the way to do it, and it works really well. Well, there's something else that I want to do now because it's important. But how about when I'm finished with this, then we'll go and do something, and then you just set the expectations right, and it works well.
Exactly.
It's 95% of the time. So.
But I think people can learn a lot from kids about, being a little more relaxed and prioritizing some of the fun things in life. I think that's a really good stress reliever, to plan a little bit more fun into your life. And actually, now when you're talking about different things we can do in order to reduce stress, I see people with a lot of to-do lists, and you have these long lists stress people out. Although it can be very gratifying to mark those things off your list. I always think that, and I've heard this advice before, that don't make to-do lists, just plan, right? And so when I have a weekly planner that I use a lot when I'm working at home. It's on paper actually, although I still use a digital calendar for my appointments, but I will plan things like yoga in the morning, or time to go for a walk outside. And if you plan those in, then they'll be a priority, and you'll be able to fit it into your day. But it actually gives you from first thing in the morning till at night. So 7 days a week. So, I'm not a fan of planning every minute of my day, but if you can plan 60% of it, you'll find that when you're setting that time for yourself, like an appointment that you would have with anybody else, then you're more likely to keep it rather than going, I just didn't get around to that. And then you'll find you'll have a lot more balance. And I think that's a big key to stress, to managing your stress levels. It's good to have a certain amount of stress so you become resilient, but it's also important to have balance. Just like the expectation to be happy all the time is ridiculous. I think one of these days we'll have a topic around happiness, because that's a big topic for me. How you define happiness is really, it's not that hedonistic pleasure. But anyway, without getting off topic, but even that is a balancing act, right? Having enough moments of happiness is in the moment, and having enough moments in your week, in your day, that where you feel happy, where you feel good about yourself, is going to offset a lot of that stress. So I mean, that's balance is a really key. Self-reflection, balance are really important pieces to this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think I mentioned already balance for me. It's a real value actually, 'cause
Mhm.
balance in from a lot of different perspectives. And now you talk about the balance between the different nerve systems that needs to be in place. Also, that one thing that I've noted, I don't have that issue myself, I mean, because I'm not. And my workload isn't that big most of the times, but I work with a lot of leaders who are extremely busy, and I find one thing that many of them do is to make sure that when they're planning, because they have to plan, and sometimes they're not actually in charge of their own planning, and that becomes an issue when, so
Mhm.
you have a secretary who's planning all your schedule and stuff, but making sure that in your plan you have big chunks when you can rebalance, when you can, there no agenda, you can think about the how, you can make up on stuff that you had to do, you can go out for a walk. I know that a lot of people, especially in Sweden, where you have the nature all around you, that you can just take some time off, go for a walk. And it's very productive because you think about things from different perspectives. You don't have that pressure on, oh, I need to perform or be in front of people all the time. Just thinking about the how in things rather than, what do I have to do now? So balancing out that what and how. I mean, on a team level, but also on an individual level, I think it's really important, and making sure that you have chunks for that in your planning.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think on a leadership level, when you talk about fostering that sense of balance in your organization, I think it's great if you're a CEO or a top level manager and you've got a PA who can book all your appointments for you, and you can say to that person, slot in this amount of time. I need this time for myself, or even I need a block of time every day just to think strategically about things. So it's not just kind of when the pressure's on.
mm,
I think great leaders are really successful people that I've worked with or that I talk to have a morning routine that they'll
mhm,
also do. So routines are really helpful because then you don't even need to think about it. If you get up in the morning, you get some exercise, you meditate. Some people, healthy breakfast is important for them.
mm,
Um, I'm on a different eating regime, so I don't eat breakfast. But everybody needs to find their own rhythm that works for them, and I think having some good routines is a really good one, because then you're not always fighting with yourself to get it done. It just becomes a habit.
mm,
And certainly, if you have the benefit of having a PA to book your appointments, that takes a lot of stress off of you because they have the stress of managing your day. But in terms of it, you're in a leadership position trying to foster that in teams, being a good example, but also making sure that the people in your team have the right tools, and you encourage them, and you give them because there are in companies, if there's a culture where it feels like you know it's good to be seen the last one leaving the office. Okay, right now
yeah.
that's not the case, but in our case, it could be. If it becomes a cultural norm within your organization to be writing emails at 11 p.m. at night, maybe if you're a leader, maybe the thing to be doing is to be going, listen, I saw you were working into the night. Do you have too much work to do? Asking questions about their workload.
Mm,
And for some people, it might be, well, look, I've got my kids, and so I needed a couple of hours during the day, so it's easy for me in quiet time to write those emails in the evening. Okay, but at least having asked the question so that they recognize the message there is by asking the question, it's like, well, I'm concerned about your well-being. I want to make
mm,
sure that you don't have too much workload. So the expectation of our organization is not that we work you to death. You need to communicate if you got too much to do or if you're stressed. And if you can
mm,
have that healthy, open communication, you have a level of trust that's there that allows that. I think that's a super important message as a leader that you can convey to your team. And again, for individuals, it's all about being accountable to yourself and having
yeah.
boundaries.
Mhm.
So
I mean, it taps into to empathy that we talked about before, to be
Mm,
empathetic of different people's life situations and able to include different, well, just different types of individuals into the organizations. And then, you deal with stress in different ways. Different individuals will be react to stress in different ways, etc. So just having an empathy of that. But also, I mean, from that organizational point of view, I mean, again, China, being the last one to leave the office, it's still there, right? It's
mm,
seen as something good. In the IT industry, I mean, you talk a lot about what do you call it, 996, that to working from 9 in the morning to 9 in the evening, 6 days a week. That's a standard, right?
mm.
That's a culture that you try to promote. Even I heard that that's changing a little bit now. Which will be interesting to follow. But I mean, yeah, what kind of setup are you creating for people around you? And I think in that sense, I mean, the pandemic situation might have a quite positive impact from that point of view, that we're becoming more flexible and we're more accountable for our own time schedules and planning, etc.
Yeah, I think you touched on a few things there that I think are interesting to talk about. Having a more agile work environment is great because people feel more empowered, they feel more flexible, they feel like they have more control. When you feel like you're in control, you have less stress, it guaranteed. Obviously, the more responsibility you have, that can also increase stress levels. But when you feel like you have the power to change things, it makes a big difference. When you have really rigid hierarchies, okay, then it can be more difficult, and then you have to find different ways to reduce stress levels. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. The point you were getting to right before that. I had a really important point. Like, where were you going right before that? Just remind me again.
Well, we were just talking about how setting up, having a platform, or what is the context that you're creating in your organization for stress. I mean, that was one of the thoughts, but also no, I lost my thought as well.
Yeah, that's okay. No, but now you're reminding me. So obviously, the things that you can do will differ depending on your the structure of your organization. So I think within your teams, creating a level of trust so that you can have a level of vulnerability there and be able to raise your hand and say when you're feeling stress or when you're overworked. I think that we were talking. You were raising the fact that COVID has benefits from being able to work at home, and I think the point that came to me, and I didn't want to interrupt you, was that I think a lot of people are reminded of the things that they value that they have been neglecting. Right? You will find. I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Some people are like, I'm cooped up with my family all the time, and the kids are annoying me, and my relationship is, I realize that all the things that are wrong with my relationship, right? So it can bring some of the difficult challenges more in focus. But for a lot of people I've talked to, they really are enjoying. There's one guy I know. He travels a lot for work and so on, and he was like, we're at home as a family. We play board games almost every night. And really, I hear more and more of these people who are like, wow, I've forgotten how much I enjoy spending time with my kids. I have time with my partner. We can have quality discussions because we're around all the time. In the same way that you might talk to your colleagues around the water cooler or the coffee machine, they're having those conversations amongst themselves, and they're finding it's really improved their relationship. And that is another thing that points back to balance, right? To go back to remembering the things that are important and making time for those. That's going to help reduce your level of stress. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of things, and including prioritizing those things and being through the COVID situation, making the best out of that and pulling the best out of it. Like, not lamenting. It's really stressful for us, the whole thing about expectations and the expectations we have of ourselves or of the things we want to achieve. And I think when we start to reflect on, is that really what I want? And is that a fair thing to expect? You can lament about the fact that we can't go on vacations or whatever, but you can also focus on the things you're grateful for, right? And so, yeah.
Yeah, so just one thing that I want to reflect back on, because you talked about goal setting and setting objectives from that we do in the organization. So one thing that I think is really beneficial for both in my individual life, but also for organizations, when you're dealing with objective setting, is not to steer blindly on these result goals. We need to hit these numbers or whatever. And of course, that's one important aspect of setting a goal, but also thinking about, development goals or learning goals. What do we need to learn to reach that result? What are the performance goals? How do we need to perform to be able to do things? And then also maybe process goals, maybe especially for team setting, so how are we going to work how are we going to reach these goals? And just looking at goals from these different perspectives and setting up maybe aligned but different goals that are aiming for a certain result. I think that's super, super helpful. And also, of course, actively reviewing them to make sure, okay, maybe I didn't hit that result, but instead of freaking out and becoming extremely stressed about that, looking at, okay, but I learned this, and I've performed on this level, I've been doing this. It takes away some, at least part of that stress or that pressure, I think. So for working with goals in a more dynamic way, I think that's really, really important for leaders to do, but also as individuals to not only look at the result goals.
Absolutely. I think you need those intangibles, right? We always talk about intangibles, and so we need to make I think whether you're on a personal level trying to find more fulfillment in your life, or you're trying to encourage that in people in the workplace, there has to be something fun about it. There has to be something that drives your curiosity, something that helps you learn something new. And so I know for me, managing teams, or when I'm talking to someone in a leadership position, managing people's KPIs, I always encourage, give somebody in your team at least one KPI that they can define for themselves that are all about their own personal growth, right? Yeah. Sure, it needs to make a contribution, but it needs to be part of their own personal growth. So if I've worked in organizations where the only thing that was measured was how much operating profit I delivered, right? Yeah. And I mean, it's very one-dimensional. And if you think that, we can do a talk about motivation too with, Dan Pink's work, but it's been proven that, these kind of financial incentives, they're very limited. All these kind of one-dimensional kind of incentives, carrots or sticks that we use to try and motivate people, it just raises stress levels and it doesn't improve performance. So, people sometimes feel like you just have to have all this pressure to have high performance, and I disagree. I think it creates stress, it creates burnout, and it doesn't help creativity. It doesn't encourage a lot of innovation, and it doesn't encourage a lot of teamwork. It just creates a very competitive environment and people covering their back. So I think it's really important when you look at all these things that we're doing. Okay, they cause stress, and you can think, well, people have to figure that out for themselves. I mean, if you lack empathy, that might be the way you approach it. But all that pressure also won't bring you the results that you want, right? And then it just becomes this vicious circle.
Yeah, I mean, so good that you're kind of highlighting the fact here that, okay, one, there's a lot of bad leaders out there who are creating a lot of stress, and
otherwise we wouldn't have a job, right?
Yeah, but also let's recognize that it's very difficult to be a good leader. At the same time, then being a really good leader can really reduce people's stress levels, right, and create a much better workplace for others. So it's really important to develop these leadership skills. And
Exactly, and that's why that's an important note of distinction. It's unfair to say there are a lot of bad leaders. I think there are a lot of poorly informed, uneducated on leadership skills. When you think about people who work their way up a company hierarchy, how much, sure, you'll have these workshops on leadership, but at the end of the day, there's just constant pressure on these leaders for performance, and they pass that pressure on to their teams. And they, once a year to do a workshop on leadership isn't going to ingrain those kind of qualities. You have to personally have an interest in becoming a better leader, but also you have to have the opportunity to apply those skills. And if your priority is always just one-dimensional goal setting, just hit the target, then it's going to create a lot of stress, and it's not going to foster that kind of leadership that you want in your organization. So, yeah, I think another thing to be, because we have touched a few times on the autonomic nervous system, so the sympathetic and parasympathetic, and I think the really important thing for people, especially on a personal level, to remember is that the parasympathetic nervous system handles things like your digestion, your immune system, your reproductive system. So when people are talking about having trouble conceiving kids, they want to have a family, and that stresses them out. And well, the stress itself is causing the problem, because when you're stressed, your parasympathetic nervous system is impacting your reproductive system, and then no wonder you're having trouble. As just one example. So I think, again, going back to systemic principles and thinking of things systemically, it's really important to look at the relationships that these problems have with one another. Otherwise, you're going to have this whole spiral effect. And so that for on a personal level, but also on a professional level, recognizing that if you really stress people too much and their parasympathetic nervous system is always compromised, you're going to have people who have more sick days. You're going to have people who are burnt out. And then on a personal level, you'll also suffer in all those things that are then diminished because you're constantly in fight or flight or freeze mode, right? Yeah. In that whole sympathetic nervous system. And actually, I want to give a shout out to one of our colleagues who I know you also loved working with, is Vera Farag, who we worked with in China. She's a German coach and trainer, and she does a really excellent burnout seminar, management of stress seminar, and I know I learned a lot from her. But yeah, she does a real good workshop on how to manage those things, and first of all, be aware of them, recognize them, and then how to process them. So yeah, I'm sure you had a conversation with her about that as well.
Yeah, I did actually. And with many others, but yeah, she had an excellent seminar on that. But so I need to leave in a few minutes. So if we want to wrap this up a little bit,
yeah.
Could we end on the note of what do you? First of all, it would be interesting to hear your personal stories, and I can share mine as well. Like, how do you deal with stress in a good way? What makes you aware of your stress level, and what do you do about it? How do you manage it? And maybe just a few tips and tricks that works for us or that we've seen work for others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, this is a topic we could probably have a couple of hours conversation on. But I think awareness is one on many different levels. So an awareness of where the stress is coming from. Obviously, we talked about external stressors, physical stress, mental stress, emotional stress. I mean, I'm a divorced guy. Divorce is one of the most stressful things you can go through. That, I think, death in the family, or losing your job if you're the main breadwinner. So recognizing the source of your stress is a really big one. And just recognizing the emotional state you're in. So when you can identify the source of your stress, and then recognize what you have control of changing, I think that's a really big first step, right? See the problem, and then recognizing, what do I have control of, what do I not have control of? Things you don't have control of, it's just need to let go and focus on things you can change, and then go from there, start to look for solutions from there. having
Yeah.
having a very good routine, not just things that you use when you're feeling stressed, that so kind of like a prophylactic where you like taking a pill or whatever, when or having a drink. I mean, you can, a lot of abuse comes from that, right? You resort to alcohol or drugs in order to relieve your
Mm.
stress. It's much better to have a regular routine of whether it's a meditation, some kind of breathing exercise, some kind of. It's good to have those tools to use in those moments when you're stressed, like
Mm.
when you're box breathing or whatever technique you want to use. But it's also good to have a regular daily routine,
Sure.
and then yeah, just having that mindfulness, being self-reflective. I think those are the main things. Have I been clear enough on that? I think
Yeah.
it was a
I guess, I
convoluted
mean,
way of getting there.
there's so many different things that we could, but some things, something that, I mean, from a coaching perspective that I've helped others to do as well is just, listing down things that are stressing you. So it's creating some awareness is where is it coming from,
Mm,
and I think that's very helpful. And then, yeah, working with the circle of influence, circle of control. What are the things that you actually have control over? What are the things
mm,
that you can just let go of? I mean, if climate change is a real stressor for you, I mean, what can you do about it? It's just creating some of the awareness around that.
yeah.
Um, for for me personally, I think routines are great, and one routine that I started with, now I'm up to, I don't know, maybe 35, 40 days or something like that. But just, and I learned this from a former boss of me, just exercise every day.
Mm,
I didn't used to do that, and as you said before, time management. Oh, I don't have time to do that. My individual goal is to make sure that the least thing I do is to run 2 kilometers a day. I mean, if I do that fast, I'll do it in 10 minutes. Can I
mm.
squeeze in 10 minutes a day? I can always do that, right? And it's great. I'm feeling healthy, and for me, running is a fantastic way of just de-stress. It makes me think about different things. It's good for my blood pressure. I mean, it's so many different benefits. But that's my personal go-to space. And I think it's really important that finding something that works for you, right? For me, this is great
Exactly.
because it works so good for me. But just trying a few different things that makes you feel good, feel better at least. And yeah, refraining from going to the bar and take that extra drink. That's although I have probably one or two experiences when I haven't been feeling too good, and I had a few beers with some friends, and that was all I needed. So social context, I think that could also be very important.
Yeah, I mean, letting off a bit of steam, and but then the question is, was it the social connection, the ability to kind of, um, verbalize the things that are bothering you, or just reconnecting with people that may have had as much of an effect on feeling better as having a few beers
Yeah,
did. And
I just having a laugh.
yeah, exactly. Being able to see the lighter things. And I think going back to recognizing where your stress is coming from, if you're feeling overwhelmed, typical things like, breaking down the issue into smaller things. But I think the self-reflection piece is really important, because to look at first what's my current state, right? Recognizing your level of anxiety, and your level of stress, and then looking at the things that are contributing to that. And then I agree with you, having a go-to move that you have when you're feeling stressed, whether it's a breathing exercise. For me, getting out in nature is really important. Exercise is always a great one. That's one I try and make a routine to reduce stress regularly. But if you're feeling stressed in the moment, I mean, even if you can open a window, breathe in some fresh air, and take some deep breaths, that is going to help you a lot. But recognizing that you're in a stress state is a really important one, and recognizing that you can take control of it, noticing your own power. I think that's a good one. And I think the final thing I would say is recognizing that you're not in this alone. Don't be afraid to reach out. I mean, not to kind of self-promote here, but a coach can really help you get through stressful times. So can a therapist. So can a good friend if they're. friends can be a double-edged sword. Some friends are like, will just kind of commiserate with you and they'll make the stress worse. But if you can find someone who's very objective, who will be supportive but not let you off the hook, I think that's really good. So having a support person is also an important thing to remember. And look, I mean, especially during these times, mental health is super important. Make it a priority. Setting priorities to manage your time will really help reduce stress. So any other final words?
I think that's a good point to end it on. I mean, it's super important. We could talk about this for another episode, I think, for sure, because I feel like we're probably not done. But this is all we have time for today.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's always support around you, and I mean, to reach out and just talk to someone about it. Yeah.
Exactly. Great. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up there. If you want to get hold of Tobias, you can reach him through his LinkedIn profile. We would love to get your feedback. If you have questions, if you enjoyed this talk around stress and you have some questions around it, we'll be happy to answer any questions from at least from our perspective and our expertise. And love to get feedback. So any of that, you can reach out to Tobias or myself. I'm on my website, peterteuscher.com. So keep those things in mind, whether you're a leader, whether you're in an organization that feels very stressed. There are great tools you can use, or if you're an individual feeling stressed because of COVID or any other reason, make sure you get yourself some good routines. Make sure that you have a support network and take care of yourself. Mental health is super important. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Toby, as usual, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Great. And until then, everyone, thanks for joining us. Be well, and we'll speak again soon. Take care.
See you soon. Bye.